Hello, and welcome to Taco About Jesus. I'm Matt.
I'm Jess.
On this channel, we are not pastors, but we like tacoing about Jesus.
We like tacos and we like Jesus.
So,
Perfect.
yeah. So, we just figured we would, start a channel, talk about things that we like to talk about, mostly doing like book reviews of books of the Bible and what we find interesting and sharing that with
not
people.
just like book reviews, but like all kinds of different stuff related to Jesus and the Christian faith. Maybe some videos will be like on a specific topic that's just a one-off. But for now, it seems wise to start off with a book study, a study. Bible study sort of thing. So again, we're not like educated in this. We are very much students, but we want to share what we learn and learn alongside people, and then also use whatever minuscule streaming type skills we have to do something that would help brighten the world right now. So it's so dark. Anything else? Do you want to say anything else?
I think that's a pretty good introduction.
Okay.
Things,
so don't forget to hit like and subscribe to this channel, set up notifications so that you get notified whenever we put new content up. Today we are going to begin talking about kind of the very introduction content for studying the book of Esther. Now it is kind of a random book to start on, I think, and honestly, a couple months ago I was talking to Matt about what I should read because I didn't know where to start. I've wanted to read the Bible through for a long time, but I've never actually done it. And now I'm actually reading through the Bible a different way, but at the time he recommended I just start with the book of Esther. I read it, and let's do like first impressions of the book of Esther. So prior to rereading it again, that was actually the first time I'd ever heard the story of Esther, was reading it through that one time. And just being perfectly honest, I thought it was like a good story. It was a good story, but I didn't think that it was, I didn't think it was quite as powerful as the other ones. And I think it's because, usually you have God directly interacting with someone. And they have this relationship in a lot of the Old Testament books in the Bible anyway, and New Testament books, where God, like, himself finds someone, utilizes them to help a big group of people. And so, like, it is a good story. Esther is a good story, I thought, but it wasn't quite as captivating to me because it was missing that element. And then on top of that, I did like a 5-minute Google search or something that was like, well, how accurate is this historically? And of course, a bunch of secular sources, kind of surface level internet search was like, not accurate. And so for me, that's a big deal. And on this channel, we're probably gonna have a lot of fun, not just talking about like the lessons from each book of the Bible, but we're also gonna dive into, as you'll see, kind of historical background, archaeological, biblical archaeology and evidence for the Bible. We're also going to talk, or for the specific stories of the Bible, I should say. We're going to talk about Bible prophecy and how it has or has not come true to the best of our knowledge. And so anyway, that was important to me at the time. I have since learned that these are both stupid. First, like, well, maybe not stupid, but like really not true. So that's exciting. I'm excited. The idea that it wasn't as powerful as other stories.
Yeah.
And it's not at all supported historically with like proofs or whatever. But yeah, that's kind of my first impressions and how this all started. But
at the end of the day, like, the main thing is the Bible, and starting with that instead of controversial stuff is probably a good choice.
Yeah. So. Well, controversial stuff being So, for example, it's on our list to talk about, was Jesus just a prophet, which is not something that's not up for debate in the Christian faith, but it is controversial in the sense that other people from other faiths are going to be like, yes, he was just a prophet. And we're like, no.
Yeah.
So instead of starting with something like that, we're going to start with something a little more easy to digest, I guess. And then we're going to work in stuff like that too when we get a moment. But yeah. So what were your first impressions, or prior to this time? Because he's read the Bible way more than I have. So
it has been a little bit, but it never like had any real personal meaning to me. It's always just been one of those, oh yeah, she's one of those books of the Bible. It's a woman empowering story, but going back through it now, it's a lot more of, okay, God can work in different ways than just being right in your face.
Right.
So.
Right. That's the most, probably, at least at this point in time, the most, because we haven't finished our Bible study of it yet. We're going to be doing it alongside whoever is watching this. And so to start with, it seems like that's going to be the most important lesson, is how God is ever working, ever present, even when you cannot see him. And so with that, we want this specific video, as well as any other video that takes off a particular Bible study, to begin with the background information, the little things that I mentioned earlier, not just like background as far as the Bible is concerned, but like what we know historically, archaeologically, and then of course what Bible prophecy may or may not have been fulfilled, and maybe even like the debates around that. And so we're hoping to keep those things not the main focus, because it's not what's the most important. Obviously, you want to have your faith founded on the Bible alone, and just like believe what the Bible says without any outside sources to form the foundation of your faith, because that's just not going to work out. But it definitely is fun. And so starting this study off, we're going to go through that background information for this video. Part 1, the background. So feel free to like jump in at any point in time, because I feel like I'm going to be talking a lot and I can already not breathe. I'm like,
a lot of the pre-study is mostly Jess's doing. She has a little bit more of the free time to do that, so she's going to kind of have a heavy presence, yeah. And I'm here for a fun time, and
right.
And
so I'm not allowed
talk about things when I can. So
well, and I think this is going to be really good, because you have a Christian who, just like as black and white as it gets, he's been like thoroughly exposed to this stuff his whole life, and he's always has been very confident, and he hasn't needed kind of the extra resources that I sometimes need, and so when it comes to just thinking about the Bible and the lessons of the Bible just in and of themselves, he's kind of superior in that realm, and I am really good at hyperfixating on like getting all of the like interdisciplinary reaching and compiling. It's just fun. So anyway, here we go. Okay, so the Bible study aspect of this, I want to give credit where credit is due, because while we go through, well, I go through this Bible study at my church, of course, some of my thoughts are going to be influenced by the Bible study of the church, and so I recommend one I'm going through. It's called Pathways by Tony Evans. And from what I can tell so far, I really like him. He is a very well educated, very well known pastor, I believe. Just double check on that. he is one of America's most respected leaders in evangelical circles. He's a pastor, a best-selling author, and a frequent speaker at Bible conferences and seminars throughout the nation. So he actually knows what he's talking about, and he's kind of guiding our thought processes. So that's helpful. And some of this background information I'm sharing from this. So, biblical historical background. So in 587 BC, Jerusalem fell to Nebuchadnezzar, and the Jewish people were exiled into Babylon. So hopefully some people know that, but that's kind of covered more in 2 Chronicles 36, 15 through 21. And then 48 years later, 539 BC, Cyrus the Great from Persia conquered Babylon, which we'll get into like the Bible prophecy of that in a minute. And he permitted the exiled people, the Jews, to return to their homelands. That's detailed in 2 Chronicles 36, 22 through 23. But some of the Jews decided to stay, kind of scattered. And that is where the book of Esther is kind of placed, is with people who are in Susa, which was the winter capital of Persia. And we'll get more into the story, obviously, but so Darius the Great is kind of, he takes over everything. And then his son is Xerxes, also known as Ahasuerus in Hebrew. His Hebrew name was Ahasuerus. And he is who ends up being the king, but also the husband to Esther. Yeah.
Side fun note is he's also, in the movie 300, he is the bad guy.
You looked it up?
Yeah.
He's the bad guy?
He's the bad guy.
I'm trying to remember. It's been so long since I've seen that movie, but he's the bad guy.
Yeah.
Does he end up winning in that movie, or?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they all die.
Yeah.
Brutal. Okay, so anyway. Okay, so that's kind of the initial background. It puts you into a place and time historically, and then I wanted to talk about. I don't want to get lost. So next we'll hop into Bible prophecy, because it's kind of like whether or not the Bible was historically supported by what we know actually happened, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so in Isaiah 44, 24 through 28, and Isaiah 45, 1 through 7, Cyrus the Great is prophesied, the idea being that Isaiah was written before this happened. And Isaiah, the prophet, did actually live well in advance of this. I think he was like 8th century. Yeah, he was Isaiah lived in the 8th century BC, over a century before Cyrus the Great. And so the Christian thought process, and what makes sense, I'll talk about it in a little bit, is that he wrote in his lifetime all of Isaiah, or at least a major portion of it. So the Christian faith will say that like this was prophesied in advance of this actually happening. The secular ideas are kind of opposed to that, just on an a priori assumption that that's not possible, therefore it had to have been written around the same time that it happened. But anyway, it was prophesied that he would open the gates for the sake of, quote, my servant Jacob and Israel, my chosen. This is God speaking basically through Isaiah, saying, so Cyrus the Great will open the gates for the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel, my chosen. I name you, though you do not know me. He basically says he's going to ready the path for Cyrus the Great. And I think there is a narrative on the internet that you can look into about how possibly Cyrus the Great had heard this prophecy and felt like, ooh, I like this God in particular, right? Because they were polytheistic. But he was like, this God talked about me, and sweet. So that's one theory, is that he was named, prophesied, and then he had confidence to do what he needed to do because of that. But, you never know. So again, I talked about how, so the oldest piece of literature that they have right now for the Old Testament are the Dead Sea Scrolls. The parchment itself, I think, has been dated to between 233 BC to 167 BC, so that's well after the, if it takes place in the 539 BC, that's well after the fact, according to that. But it's really interesting because they, when you analyze the specific languages and the changes in the language, the linguistical changes throughout the time, even from one century to the other, they say that, okay, definitely the way the first 39 chapters of Isaiah were written are definitely, we can say that was Isaiah himself from the 8th century BC. So mind you, the oldest they have is the stuff from the 1st century, and they're willing to concede 1st or 2nd century BC. And they're willing to concede that Isaiah, the prophet, actually wrote the first 39 chapters in his lifetime, even though they only have this piece of paper, but they're not willing to concede that it was written in advance of Cyrus the Great. I do want to have kind of a separate video series talking about Bible prophecy, and in particular the prophets of Isaiah and Daniel. Daniel's really cool because I think they're proving more and more that Daniel was written well in advance of like these very, very, very specific prophecies that happened based on the they call it like Imperial Aramaic and stuff versus an older form of Aramaic. But we're not going to do that here. Suffice it to say that the standard is the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're kind of being biased in the sense that they're willing to concede that Isaiah wrote some of it, but not all of it, because
specify who they is.
Scholars, secular scholars from a variety of different fields, archaeologists. Even some linguists are like, well, it's just not possible for that to work. So, of course. I wanted to make a note, though, is that even if we say, okay, maybe it was written contemporaneously with Cyrus actually taking over the empire or whatever, Isaiah 53 was still written based on the timeline of the Dead Sea Scrolls and everything, 150 years before Christ was born. And Isaiah 53 is a messianic prophecy that talks and gives details about the purpose of Christ, the Messiah coming in, and like how he dies for the redemption of people, and talks about the manner in which he dies. So even if we say like, okay, the Cyrus thing might be bogus, it still doesn't explain how the Messiah was prophesied at least 150 years in advance, if not many, many more years in advance.
Yeah.
So take that. It's even more important. Okay. And then I wanted to talk about kind of the logic behind it too. So you have the Jewish people who are very traditionalists, very strict about not adulterating their the Old Testament. And they're, logically speaking, it's written and they are circulating it so people know what's in it. To assume that like people knew what was in it, and then at the time of Cyrus the Great, someone went in and added stuff and then acted like it was prophesied in the time of Isaiah, doesn't make sense because the Jews wouldn't have allowed that. That would just be crazy.
Yeah, that was strict.
Yeah, they were very strict. And so to think like they either would have had to have been okay with someone adding it, pretending it was prophecy, and still carried it on without like killing that person and throwing out the rubbish that they do. But they also, or they would have had to have been just oblivious to what was already in the Old Testament and what wasn't. So it's kind of a dumb argument anyway. to assume that it wasn't already circulating and generally accepted as part of the writing. They would have called people out on that.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion, I guess. Okay. So, like I said, this video is not actually beginning the study of Esther specifically. It is the background, so it goes on. I wanted to talk about what they have discovered, what secularists and biblical archaeologists, right? Secular archaeologists and biblical archaeologists have found that at least corroborates the details of Esther. So as I said before, it's based out of Susa, which was the winter capital of Persia. There were 4 capitals, and this location was the best for the winter. It was known as the gateway to Persia, and it was not in the inner region of like modern day Iran. It was kind of out. And it is a 700-acre archaeological site. It's massive. 700 acres, but there's what's called the Apadana. It is a columned audience hall, so you can imagine like where a king would sit and where all of his guests would be. They have found that it is 3 acres. It's huge. The whole palace is like 9 acres. And they've discovered the location of the gardens that are mentioned in the story of Esther. And this is going to be most seen in Esther 1:6, I believe. So you actually get kind of this, I guess it's a testimony to the accuracy of the eyewitness testimony. The person writing Esther had to have actually seen the palace and gives a very accurate depiction of what the palace and the halls looked like, and kind of the fact that there was a particular audience hall and a garden. The next really interesting thing is that the person who wrote Esther did a really, really good job differentiating between the fact that there is a citadel of Susa and a city of Susa. So when you actually look at the city, there's the town, and then there's like this bridged area where the citadel would have been.
Yeah.
And so that is in like Esther 3:15, where you can see that they make this differentiation between the city and the royal center of it. And so again, the accuracy of the eyewitness testimony, at least. And then of course they also found what they believe to be the women's quarters, and then the throne room, so you can actually go and like walk the path between where Esther was staying and where the king would have been. Also, there's support for in Esther 2:19 as well as 21 through 22, verses 21 through 22. That's where there's the conspiracy to kill Xerxes, which we'll get into later. We'll read it, we'll talk about it. But there's a conspiracy to kill Xerxes that Mordecai overhears, and that takes place at the King's Gate on the east side of the palace, by where you get access from the city, just as it's described in the Bible. And they found that it's all mud brick now, but you can see the remains of like this massive gate. All right. They also have found, I want to make sure I don't mess this up, Persepolis Administration or Administrative Archives are these blocks that they found with writing on them that are basically like the I forget the term, but they're like notes from the day-to-day activities and the people serving and all these things from this time frame that they found. And they actually found the name of Mordecai on there, so it's written as either Morduka or Moduku, and it says that he served Darius the Great and Xerxes the First, or Ahasuerus, in Susa. So I really liked this quote that I found. It's from a guy named Robert Gordis. He is a rabbinic scholar And he wrote the book Religion, Wisdom, and History, and the book of Esther. Right? Because when I first read Esther, I thought there was no support for this, and there's no basis to believe that any of this actually happened because they can't find proof, definitive proof, that Esther herself ever actually became queen. But in reference to Mordecai, who is Esther's uncle, they found his name. They found, right, this guy says that there were 2 officials with the same name at the same time in the same place is scarcely likely. So while everyone's like, this didn't happen, we have no proof, this guy's like, what are the odds that we're going to have Mordecai serving both people in the capacity that it says he did, and he was the uncle to Esther? Like, come on. So it's really interesting. There is some support for that specifically. And I just want to make sure that I don't need to actually talk about this stuff. I have so much on here. Kind of a cool little tidbit is, so they don't question like the kings at the time, or like so much who existed and who was ruling and all this stuff. That's kind of generally accepted as true, and the Bible's accurate in that, and usually is accurate in that. Even before scholars find things, they'll be like, David never existed. It's a myth, and then they found stuff about David, you know. So, but in this particular case, there's no question about like Darius the Great and Xerxes and everything like that. They do have in the city of Persepolis, they found a relief, the treasury relief of the courtroom scene or something like that, and it's this image of Darius the Great sitting on his throne with Xerxes standing behind him as the crown prince and stuff. So like, they're really well established. We have evidence for Mordecai. We might not have very specific stuff about Esther in particular, but it's just interesting that there are like just enough details that it sounds plausible that it could have happened.
TLDR of it is Isaiah prophesied that this was going to happen. There is archaeological proof that all of these people, except for Esther,
which there
existed.
There might be some. So there is a name, I forget the name mentioned. They have found a name, and some people can make the argument that that lady was actually Esther.
Yeah, and but it's been shown that like there isn't much historical record of any of the wives.
Yes.
Of Xerxes or
right.
Those people at the time.
Right, and why would there be much historical evidence of a Jewish replacement for a Persian queen? And why would there be evidence that the Persian king had a soft spot for the Jewish people, in the sense that he then, right, so once a law was made, it couldn't be broken. So when the law was made that they were going to go out and kill a bunch of Jews, they couldn't reverse that. The king couldn't even reverse that. So they had to do a separate roundabout law that said that, well, the Jews can defend themselves. But like, why would someone ruling in the Persian Empire actually want that on their record? And that's actually something that's very common for the time period, even for like the Egyptian things.
Isaiah said it was going to happen. There's proof that these people existed and that it actually happened.
Well, there's proof that some of them existed.
Yeah, that some of them existed, and that the events, overall overarching events happened.
Well, mostly just not so much the events, but the eyewitness testimony being super accurate about like the geographical. Wow. the geographical. Okay, I ate an apple. It's not tacos. I ate an apple, and apples make me burp. I don't know why, but there's good, like we could say that the eyewitness testimony, whoever wrote this knew what they were talking about. There's at least that, visually speaking.
Yeah.
So.
I think that's a pretty good start.
Yeah. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, if you want to hear me ramble about this kind of stuff. And next time, we're actually going to jump into talking about the first 2 chapters.